What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 10 top 36 running back rankings. 4 teams on bye this week, definitely some fantasy relevant options that are going to be out of the picture. So hopefully these rankings help you guys go out and set your lineups this week. If you enjoy, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's dive right into tier 1, and these are the top 3 in points per game. We're not, getting crazy with it. Regardless of matchup, these guys are going to be locked in your lineup. So Jonathan Taylor, CMC, and Bijan Robinson. Then moving into tier 2, going to start it off with James Cook going up against the Dolphins. Dolphins have been a really strong matchup for opposing fantasy running backs, giving up the 6th most points per game. James Cook, 19 PPR points per game on the season. What's kind of crazy is that he is doing that with pretty much zero receiving production. He has caught one singular pass in the last 4 games. Like, when you think of James Cook, you're thinking of someone who does have a lot of receiving upside. At this point, he's kind of like Derrick Henry, where he's just dominating with rushing volume on good offense. He's super efficient. He has that touchdown upside, and it's working, so I'm not going to go away from it. Obviously, I'd like to see him get more involved as a pass catcher, but 19 points per game, hard to argue with that at this point. After Cook, I've got Jahmyr Gibbs as my running back 5, and he's been pretty disappointing this season. You've got guys like CMC, Jonathan Taylor, who are flirting with like 25 plus PPR points per game. Bijan, which it was like kind of, a common choice of you drafting Bijan, you drafting Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley. Obviously, so far, the correct answer has been Bijan, but like Jahmyr Gibbs is right in that mix to be running back 1, and he's not really flirting with like 20 plus points per game. And we're coming off a week 9 performance where he was out carried and out targeted by David Montgomery. Now, in my opinion, that is just insane. I don't see how like the Lions are gonna, review the film from this past week and realize that they were just not giving their best player offensively the ball. Like, to me, that's crazy. And I know he had a screw up in pass protection. Monty, very reliable. But Montgomery also lost a fumble. And Jahmyr Gibbs is just clearly the better running back. He's got to touch the ball more. I think he will this week, and I think he'll bounce back against the Commanders. Running back 6, I've got Devon Achane going up against the Bills. It's a solid matchup. They're top 8 in points per game allowed to the running back position. Devon Achane, despite, all the craziness around him on the Dolphins, super consistent, 12 plus PPR points in all 9 games this season. Really strong workload, 13.4 carries, more importantly, 6.7 targets per game so far. So I think he keeps it rolling here. Then I've got Rico Dowdle, and it's just officially time to put some respect on Rico Dowdle's name. Obviously, he had those 2 monster games as the starter with Chuba Hubbard out. Chuba's back. Now they're in more of a split. Dave Canales comes out, pretty much is like reading the obituary for Chuba Hubbard, talking about how like it's going to be Rico Dowdle moving forward. And he was not lying. 25 carries for Rico Dowdle in a game that he came in banged up against the Packers. Super tough matchup for opposing running backs. He turns those 25 carries into 130 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, it is truly insane what Rico Dowdle's doing. Had a decent year last year with the Cowboys, but like is signing with the Panthers on clear backup money. And when he's gotten the opportunities, he's just been sensational. In his 3 games as the running back 1 for this team, he's put up 32.4, 33.9, and 28.1 PPR points. So shout out to Rico Dowdle. He draws a nice matchup here against the Saints. I think he has to be locked into your lineup at this point as a tier 2 running back for me. And then the last guy in this tier, it's going to be Josh Jacobs going up against the Eagles. He's the running back 5 in points per game on the season. Eagles, you'd think they'd be a pretty tough matchup. They're actually top 10 in points per game allowed to the running back position. So matchup doesn't really scare me here. Now moving into tier 3, going to kick it off with Bucky Irving going up against the Patriots. Now, there's no guarantee he plays this week. Obviously, he's missed a lot of time with his foot and shoulder injuries. But if he does return, this is about where I'd have him. Just a super strong fantasy running back. I don't think Rachaad White really did anything to like pull away in this backfield. Or not even pull away, but just kind of gain a larger workload. Like, he was kind of bleeding opportunities to Sean Tucker the last time we saw this Buccaneers offense. And so Bucky, just a proven talent. He's going to have a solid workload. He's going to have that pass catching upside. It's not a good matchup here against the Patriots. They are bottom 4 in points per game allowed to the running back position. But Bucky's someone who I think is pretty matchup proof if he is healthy. Then I've got Saquon going up against the Packers. And I think we all have to hope that week 8 was like a turning point for his fantasy production. 14 carries, 150 rushing yards and a touchdown, 4 receptions for 24 yards and a touchdown. It had been kind of tough sledding before that. It's not a good matchup against the Packers. They are bottom 6 in points per game allowed to the running back position. But I think back end RB1 is fair for Saquon. Then I've got Derrick Henry going up against the Vikings. He's had really strong usage in the last 3 weeks. The Ravens are 5th in implied points. Lamar Jackson back in the lineup. I think you got to feel good about Derrick Henry as a strong running back 1 rest of season. And then the last 2 guys here, Kyren Williams, Jaylen Warren, 2 guys who are just, pretty consistent. They're going to get solid usage. Jaylen Warren getting in the end zone twice. Good to see there, especially in kind of a more inefficient game. And then pretty like mid-level matchups going up against the 49ers and the Chargers. Now moving into tier 4, we got to see Ashton Genty coming off the bye week. The usage was there. It was a fine fantasy day. It wasn't crazy efficient or anything. He does draw a pretty tough matchup this week going up against the Broncos. They're giving up the 5th fewest points per game to the running back position. I still like the workload. This offense is going to run through Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty. I think he's a fine, higher end running back too. Then I've got Breece Hall going up against the Browns. Also a tough matchup. Browns allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to the running back position. But Breece Hall coming off the bye week. Prior to that, his best fantasy game of the season by far, 32.9 PPR points. Should actually be a pretty competitive game. Could be really gross, but I'm still fine riding with Breece Hall here. And then in that same matchup, I've got Quinshon Judkins going up against the Jets. Now, he did suffer a shoulder injury going into the bye week in week 8. The reports are that he should be good to go. At least I haven't seen anything negative about him missing, an extended amount of time here. And I think what's really good about this matchup is that Judkins hasn't necessarily been super game script proof, where if the Browns are trailing by a lot, trailing early, they will kind of pivot to like a Dylan Sampson, Jerome Ford type. This is a game that should be pretty competitive, should get a pretty solid workload out of Quinshon Judkins. At my running back 17 spot, I've got DeAndre Swift going up against the Giants, and I've got both of these Bears running backs ranked pretty highly. I'll obviously talk about Monungai when I get to him, but Swift missed this past week with a groin injury, and I think his usage is probably going to slip in this backfield, assuming he does return this week. It's just a really nice matchup here against the Giants. They're allowing the 3rd most points per game to the running back position, and I think both DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monungai can coexist in this backfield, especially in this specific matchup going up against the Giants. So Swift, I think he'll be fine on the ground. He has looked good also. I know Monungai looked great in week 9, but Swift's also been very good post-bye, so he's going to be like a mid-tier RB2 for me this week. I don't think he's just going to straight up lose his job outright, after missing 1 game with injury. After Swift, I got Ramondre Stevenson going up against the Buccaneers. He misses week 9 with a toe injury. I'm not super concerned about his workload. I'd love to come out here and say, I think Travion Henderson's taken over the running back 1 spot. My fantasy bags would love that. I just don't really think it's the case. Henderson was fine, but he didn't do anything to pull away. We've seen Ramondre go through a lot of struggles, and the Patriots have just not gone away from him. So if he's back, the Bucs are allowing the 7th most points per game to the running back position. I think Ramondre is a strong running back too. Running back 19, I've got Travis Etienne coming off season highs in week 9 in carries, targets, and receiving yards. So good to see there from a usage perspective. It is just a tough matchup here against the Texans. The Jaguars are all the way down at 18.5 implied points, which is super low, especially considering Trevor Lawrence is still healthy, all of that. Wide receiver room, obviously pretty banged up. And then the last guy in this tier, it's going to be J.K. Dobbins going up against the Raiders. Now, there are some solid things about this matchup. They're 9.5-point favorites that could lead to a decent amount of volume for J.K. Dobbins. The issue is just that he is so touchdown dependent. He was cruising through 5 weeks, right? Scored 4 touchdowns in those first 5. He has not scored a touchdown in his last 4 games, and that's just really going to cap his production because he doesn't catch passes, and he can be efficient on the ground, but if he's not getting into the end zone, he's going to need to rush for 100-plus yards for you to feel decent about him in your fantasy lineup. But this certainly could be the week where he gets back on track in the touchdown department. Now, moving into tier 5, I'm going to start it off with Kamani Vidal going up against the Steelers. And week 9 was super disappointing for Vidal. He was coming off, kind of like the breakout week 8 performance. He had the amazing matchup lined up against the Titans, and he just completely fell flat, like 12 carries for 30 yards, no receiving involvement. And now he's kind of drawing a tougher matchup here against the Steelers, who are allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the running back position. You also have Joe Alt, who's now down for the season. Just a real bummer all around there for the Chargers and their weapons. So I still think Vidal's playable as like a back-end RB2, but certainly don't feel anywhere near as good as I did about him, heading into week 9. After Vidal, I've got Trey Benson going up against the Seahawks. Now, there's no guarantee he plays this week, but it seems like he is nearing a return from his knee injury. This running back room is just so gross. Like, I thought Bam Knight would be a really nice play. All of a sudden, they're rolling with Amari DiMercato as like their number 1. So part of ranking Benson is I just also don't want to have to rank Bam Knight and DiMercato, but I do think there's a legit chance he returns this week. And like, the offense has looked good with Brissett. Who knows what happens there? But Trey Benson stepping in, I think he comes back and is a running back 2 right away. Then I've got Aaron Jones going up against the Ravens. Jones did suffer a shoulder injury, minor AC joint sprain. It doesn't seem like he's going to miss a lot of time, if any. So if he plays, this is where I'd have him. He just looked like the better running back in week 9. 9 carries for 78 yards, super efficient on the ground. 2 targets, 2 receptions for 20 yards. And then he's going up against the Ravens, who are allowing the 4th most points per game to the running back position. Now, I do think that defense has gotten better. They've gotten healthier. But game script-wise, I also think this is a decent spot for Aaron Jones, likely trailing against the Ravens. Up next, I've got David Montgomery going up against the Commanders. Lions, second in implied points. I did just talk about with Jahmyr Gibbs how Montgomery had more carries, had more targets. I don't think that's going to stick, but the fact that like the Lions are willing to have the touches be so close, that is good for David Montgomery. Game script wise, I think it's a good spot for him. I mentioned him earlier on. This is where I have Kyle Monangai as my running back 25. And once I found out that DeAndre Swift was out, I was pretty much all in on Kyle Monangai. Had a lot of shares of him in my leagues, just kind of sitting on my bench as a handcuff. It was a great spot against the Bengals. Also, no Roschon Johnson. And Monangai just dominated 26 carries for 176 rushing yards, 5 targets, 3 receptions for 22 yards. Now, I know it was against the Bengals, but he just straight up looked great. He runs hard. He's always falling forward. Had some involvement as a pass catcher. So I think Monangai is going to have a role moving forward. Now, does he fully, usurp DeAndre Swift? I don't really think so. Maybe in the long run, but like here in week 10, I'm not betting on it. But I still think he could force a really strong committee. Swift being more of the pass catching back, Monangai being more of like the short yardage goal line guy. I mean, it's kind of like the, Montgomery Gibbs dynamic that Ben Johnson had with the Lions, obviously to a much less talented extent, but I still think Monangai is very playable as like a fringe RB2 option this week. Then I've got Kenneth Walker going up against the Cardinals, and I think week 9 had some potential bright spots. Coming off the bye week, Walker leads the running back room in snaps, routes, carries, and targets, and I think the somewhat notable thing that didn't necessarily translate to fantasy production was that when Kenneth Walker got inside the 10, the Seahawks were not urgently trying to get him off the field, right? In previous games, if you roster Kenneth Walker, you've been super frustrated because Kenneth Walker kind of leads them down the field, and right when they get close to the goal line, in comes Zach Charbonnet, and he is going to vulture that touchdown. Now, we didn't see Kenneth Walker actually get into the end zone on a goal line carry. Kind of funny, they end up bringing in A.J. Barner to tush push. And so, if it's not Zach Charbonnet, they're bringing in the tight end to run the QB sneak. But it's possible that coming out of the bye week, they don't feel as set on Charbonnet being like the clear-cut goal line back. And if you could just get Kenneth Walker having like not even 50%, like 40% of the goal line looks, like that could still make him somewhat relevant given his talent. So I'm leaving the light on for Kenneth Walker. Still don't feel amazing about him. Like I've got him, ranked behind the Bears running back 2, but high-end running back 3, I think is fair. And then the last 2 guys in this tier, Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. This was much closer to a 50-50 split than I was expecting. Tracy more involved as the pass catching back. Devin Singletary, the guy who got the one goal line snap. So in a decent matchup here against the Bears, not super scared of this defense. I think they're fine to close out tier 5. It's definitely not ideal, though, because you probably picked up Tyrone Tracy thinking he would be the clear-cut running back 1. I know on some running back needy teams, at least one of them, I spent a lot of fab on Tyrone Tracy thinking he would be the clear top option. Through one game, that is not the case. And then the 6th and final tier would, like to avoid playing these dudes, but bye weeks, I get it. We'll start it off with Woody Marks going up against the Jaguars. Week 9, the usage wasn't terrible, like 10 carries, 3 targets. Unfortunately, those 13 opportunities turned into 2.7 PPR points. We don't know about the status of CJ Stroud coming off his concussion. And then the Jaguars been decently tough against opposing running backs, allowing the 10th fewest points per game. So he's probably the most valuable Texans running back, but man, this offense with Stroud is bad, and without Stroud, they are even worse. Then I've got RJ Harvey going up against the Raiders. And I'll make the point that if Stroud does not play this week, I would have RJ Harvey ahead of Woody Marks. I think his usage is a lot less reliable, like, 8 touches in week 8, 7 touches in week 9, but he's making the most of them, like last 2 games, 24.1, 16.6 PPR points. And I do think in a matchup that might not be super competitive, we could see a little bit more of RJ Harvey and honestly just like more running back usage in general. Then I've got Zach Charbonnet going up against the Cardinals. The big thing with Charbonnet had been the goal line usage, right? Like he was the touchdown vulture. With that somewhat up in the air, I certainly don't feel great about Zach Charbonnet. He's like a mid-tier RB3 option for me. Then potentially one of the most disappointing picks so far in fantasy, and specifically like a guy who hasn't gotten hurt and hasn't even had like odd usage. Like obviously the rookie running backs, Henderson, Harvey, they've been super disappointing, but you can at least kind of cope with the fact that like they've barely gotten on the field. Alvin Kamara has gotten on the field and he has just been unbelievably terrible. In his last 3 games combined, he has rushed for only 63 total yards. He has 6 receptions for 28 yards and 13.1 PPR points per game. I think a lot of people would have been a little bit disappointed if he only averaged 13.1 PPR points per game, especially in the first half of the season where he's been like that early season hammer. He has 13.1 total PPR points in the last 3 weeks. It's tough because like you look at him, you look at his potential role, you think like, how am I putting him behind like a Zach Charbonnet or an RJ Harvey? But the dude just doesn't produce. And so like at some point, he's got to just get tanked in the rankings. And the Panthers also not as bad against opposing running backs as you might think. Running back 33, I've got Travion Henderson. Kind of mentioned him with Ramondre. He had 14 carries for 55 yards, 6 targets, 4 receptions for 32 yards. He was fine. Like, he didn't look terrible. I don't think he's going to get, demoted on the team after this game. But it also wasn't like the statement performance where you're like, all right, yeah, he's really going to dig into the usage of Ramondre Stevenson. So you'd like to see him more involved. He'd obviously be ranked way higher if Ramondre continued to miss time. But if Ramondre's back, this is where I'd have him. And then if I wanted to be like super nitpicky, this might be like a tier 7. I just didn't want to have a million tiers. So I've got Jordan Mason going up against the Ravens. Mason under 5 PPR points in back-to-back games. It's likely a bad game script for him. The only way I think he's super playable this week is if Aaron Jones is out with that shoulder injury. And then the last guy in this tier, Nick Chubb, going up against the Jaguars. He has scored under 9 PPR points in his last 3 games. Even if the usage is there, like even if he's carrying the ball 11, 12, 13 times, it's probably going to go for like 35 yards, no touchdowns, and he's not going to catch passes. So just not a super useful fantasy player. And that is going to wrap it up for my top 35 running back rankings. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.